Demographics, an aging population, actually it'll be an aging rich population and a young poor population on the whole globally. What does that mean for products and services? How does one best meet the needs of those consumers as they would see them? They're expecting to see taxation change a lot as governments shift the burden of taxation away from income and towards goods and services on consumption. Governments will tax consumption to reduce consumption. That affects everybody. That affects the poorest as well. If the price of water goes up or the price of electricity or food goes up, that isn't just something that affects the middle classes, that affects the poorest as well. And governments will be the carriers of that message. They will be the chargers of those prices. There are significantly changing consumer expectations. People are going to vote with their wallets. I will buy a fair trade product and not that product. I will buy a low carbon product and not that product. I will buy a product that respects nature and respects people and not that product. And at the same time, the great hammer of regulation, which of course governments like to apply, one thinks that the private sector tries to resist regulation, but there's an interesting recent trend of companies lobbying for regulation, wanting to see certainty, wanting to be able to make long-term decisions that they know are the right decisions for the planet and for its people, but in the short term, driven by short-term market pressures, they find it hard to make. They're fascinated by the growth of the BRICS economies, Brazil, India, China and South Africa. They're fascinated by those and seeing the growth of the Tatas and the ICICI Bank as different sorts of companies, huge global players on the stage. And they've come to recognize that there's nothing left that is local. Everything now is connected. What you do in country A will come to haunt you or you can be proud of around the world. The World Bank did a recent recosting of the likely costs and implications of pandemic flu, which is the greatest threat that they've identified still. It's up to $3 trillion now. You can't sit in your nice corporate office in London or Manhattan or Frankfurt and think you're going to in some way escape that. Okay, so what are the opportunities in there and some of the examples? Well, clearly the opposite of sustainability is unsustainability, and there are very few organizations that kind of vote for unsustainability. So they've got that word, and they're trying to work out what it means for them. They would like to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Being part of the problem doesn't sell very well, so they'd like to be part of the solution. They can be surprisingly flexible, actually. You probably may not be aware that Nokia, the telephone company, started its life cutting down trees in the Swedish forests and just spotted a market opportunity. It doesn't cut down trees anymore. The future, therefore, is full of opportunity as well as risk. I've been stressing some of the risks. They are profound, but the opportunities are, it is perceived, significant as well. Now, they may well be opportunities at the base of the pyramid. They may well be those economic opportunities to provide goods and services affordable, relevant, appropriate, accessible for the poorest. Don't know. There's still quite a debate about the whole bottom of the pyramid thing. But there's no question that if you look at what the world is going to need in terms of energy, transport, water, construction, whole range of new ways of doing things, there are going to be significant sums of money made by companies who get that bit right. And they'll get it right because it's the right decision to be made. Technology, it is felt, may save us. I'm dubious myself. I think behavior is more likely to save us, but technology is bound to be part of the solution. So a whole area of potential new markets, lots of innovation. Importantly, those markets need to be inclusive. If you haven't yet read UNDP's riveting latest report, Growing Inclusive Markets, I would recommend you do. For a UN document, it's curiously relevant. And the final thing, I suppose, is that it's where the people are. The population we know is growing fast. We're expecting another 2.5 or so billion people. They will all be in countries we currently classify as developing, and they will basically all be living in favelas, shanties, slums in those places. A few examples. I joined CARE, as I said earlier, because I was really impressed by its approach to enterprise. And early on in my time at CARE UK, we were part of something called Business Partners for Development, a very early experiment in whether we could talk to each other, companies, governments, and NGOs. It was okay, it worked okay. We didn't set the world on fire, but we did learn lots. I was introduced at the very first meeting in the World Bank, which I was nervous about going into anyway, as this is Will, and he represents global civil society. Well, I nearly left the room at that point because it reflected such a misunderstanding of NGOs, but the fact remained, at least we were talking to each other. As Promboon mentioned, I'm chairman of a company called WASUP. Now, I said the word company, not charity. We've recognized that the delivery of water and sanitation to the poorest people in the world is another example of market failure. Poor people paying significantly more than they need to for a service and still getting a rotten service. Governments appear not to be able to do it or be prepared to, and the private sector considers it too risky. WASUP is a hybrid. CARE, WWF, WaterAid sits alongside Unilever, Thames Water, and a civil engineering company, Halcro, and we've combined our resources. We do what we do best. We leave outside the things we do less well. We don't ask CARE to do technical designs of infrastructure. We get Halcro to do that. We don't ask Halcro or Thames Water to do community participation because they're lousy at it. We do that, or WaterAid does that. It's about recognizing the skills we need and applying them appropriately. I'd like to use the example of S.A.B. Miller, a brewer. It's a local example as well. And they started this journey by recognizing that HIV/AIDS for them was an issue, which was a business issue and was rapidly a human rights issue. And they spoke about it in those terms, and they did things about it. They've now recognized that water and the impact of climate is a fundamental business issue in terms of how you grow your barley, in terms of how much water you use in your breweries. They have got to get that right. They have recognized their supply chain is critically important to them, how to build those local relationships, how to get carbon out of it, how to ensure supplies as the world's food situation starts to worsen. And they're looking at base of the pyramid products in terms of products and beers which are affordable by more people in any society. It's an interesting example of a company, and I don't promote beer as a great product necessarily, but it's an interesting example of a company that now finds itself talking with organizations like CARE around the world to better understand these issues. You may have heard of the review that Oxfam and Unilever did of the impact of Unilever's activities in Indonesia. The process itself, very painful, bumpy, interpersonal relationships grinding away. Fact remains, Oxfam was able to work with Unilever to identify the fact that Unilever's processes and impact on Indonesia was profound. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people's lives impacted by the activity of that company, and positively.